I'm super excited today because today we have a special guest on Courageous Conversations powered by Unstoppable. Kevin Pauga is one of the top people who talks about the NCAA tournament in multiple fashions. And the first thing I want to say is people are saying that there are people on primetime television like ESPN, like Lenardi, that you have so much more insight and thoughts and perspective. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, no, it's good to be with you both. It's Kevin Pauga, associate AD at Michigan State, and kind of got my start as a basketball manager at MSU, and have been involved on the analytics and the scheduling side for an extended period of time now. So certainly been kind of a long journey to this point, but have been involved not just on the scheduling side, but there's 6 metrics that are part of the NCAA tournament team sheets. The net is the primary sorting tool. There's 2 results-based metrics, which are ESPN strength of record metric and my KPI metric. And then there's 3 on the predictive side, which are more the how good is your team, which would be Ken Pomeroy's metric, Jeff Sagarin, as well as ESPN's BPI metrics. So what the committee's got in their toolbox is multiple tools, so that they can kind of see where the differences lie, and also be able to kind of identify and minimize outlier metrics. If you see across 6 metrics that a team is pretty consistent, you can feel a little bit more confident about it. But if you've only got 1 metric, let's say, and that metric happens to be where a team's an outlier, let's say a team is 10, 12, 11, 13, 14, and 37, it's pretty easy to identify that 37 is probably an outlier metric. If you only have 1 metric on the team sheet and it happens to be the 37, that's where you've got problems. So the process has certainly improved over the last 5 or so years with the additional tools in the committee's toolbox.
Hey, KP, funny story before I ask you my question. I don't know if you remember this. You were a manager, and if you remember, I used to run our team camp, our shootout, and I never will forget. The first year we had it, and we had all the city teams there, and we're worried about the schedule and everything, and were we going to be able to stay on schedule and everything like that. And if you recall, I was going nuts when we had a couple teams not show up, and then I remember you and Herner walked over to me and said, "I got it, G. I got it. Yeah, I mean, I tell you, man, you were really a lifesaver in that situation, and how you did that stuff that quickly and to, keep us on schedule and then reschedule teams. It's something that it seems like you've always had a great knack for, and not only a great knack, but enjoy doing it. Can you give us a little background on why that is?
Yeah, that it's interesting now in hindsight. I do remember that instance. It seemed something annually, but it was kind of a prelude to what was going on during COVID. I'm not sure that we anticipated it at the time, but we were rescheduling, rebuilding schedules literally on a daily basis for that for that season, as you will remember. I'll let you kind of inside baseball here, not just Michigan State and the Big Ten, but nationally with multiple conferences. I had a checklist every morning where I would wait to hear from different conference offices as to who had tested positive and who couldn't play. And we had a work reschedule every single day. Not everybody knew where the games were going, because the working schedule one day would change the next day if some other team was no longer able to play. So there was a game in particular for Michigan State that we announced one date where it got played, but in the process of it not getting played to it getting announced, that game was on about 5 or 6 different dates along the way. So growing up as a kid, I was very much into the kind of the logic problems, the puzzles, trying to kind of decode things, even as a 6-year-old. And so that was always something of interest, and to be able to overlap that with with some of the computer programming skills that I've got, with the sports understanding that I've been able to develop over the years. It's kind of been a mismatched marriage where there's a need in that space, and
Right.
a whole lot of people that really care to dive into it.
Man.
Yeah, I just want to mention to the audience that for those of you who don't know Kevin, and I call him KP. We call him KP here at State, and I think all around the nation he's known as KP. But just so the audience knows, KP is also one of, if not the best, scheduling gurus in the country. I mean, the SEC, the ACC, all these people call him for help on their scheduling issues, and he does a pretty good job. But KP, can you tell our audience, how does the NCAA go about selecting the members of the selection committee?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's now 12 members on the committee. That is a relatively new addition.
Right.
They had gone with 10 committee members for the longest time. And within men's basketball, for the most part, it's going to be conference commissioners or athletic directors that are going to fall into that. But there are guidelines in terms of conference representation on that committee. For instance, right now is with the 12 members, each one of the A5 conferences, so that's the Pac-12, the Big 12, the Big 10, the SEC, and the ACC. Each one of those 5 conferences are guaranteed one representative. So there's intentionality there about who's part of that committee, and typically they serve about 5-year terms. Sometimes folks change jobs along the way, and some things may otherwise change. But there are some very specific guidelines so that they're trying to create as broad a group geographically, conference affiliation, as possible.
Well, I specifically remember one year where Mark Hollis, our ex-AD, was on the selection committee, and there was I guess there was a lot of, I don't know if it was a lot of controversy, but Mark was on that committee, and it came down to whether we were going to be a number 1 seed or a number 2 seed, and what actually happens in that situation. Does that AD, if he has a horse in the race, does he actually get a vote to determine where his in particularly where his school would go or his team would go?
They don't, and what you're referencing is 2016. It was Oklahoma, Oregon, and Michigan State, 3 teams for the final 2 spots on the one line. And full disclosure, all 3 teams were really close that particular year. And it just so happened that not only was Mark on the committee, but Joe Castiglione, the AD at Oklahoma, was also on the committee.
Wow!
So what happens there is that any vote that's involving a team that you've got a conflict with, and those conflicts are very clearly defined on the front end. You're not only do you not get a vote, but you're not allowed to be in the room. So event with Mark, let's say that there was nothing else going on, and it was just Michigan State and being compared against somebody else that that there was no conflict with. At the time, it was 10 members on the committee. That vote would have only included 9 members. And so that's how that would have gone. It's certainly not a perfect system, G, and as you can appreciate, I've yet to meet a coach that said overseeded. Everybody always thinks that they're underseeded. They should always be higher than they are, but obviously there can only be 4 1 seats. Like even this particular year, there's probably 5 teams: Houston, Alabama, Kansas, Purdue, UCLA, in some order, that have strong cases to be a 1 seed. One of them is going to get left out because we can't have 5. So
Exactly.
Likely going to be the top 2 seed, and there's going to be some other ancillary benefits that come to that for whoever that team is. But those are difficult decisions because you're oftentimes splitting hairs between teams that not only may not have played, but they may have no common opponents. They play a schedule that is very different from one another. And so you're really splitting hairs as to what the difference is. And it's not, and that's where trying to go by the eye test, as much as some folks want to go by that eye test,
Right.
like, let's just say UCLA, like I can easily make a case that Purdue's the better team. I could also equally make the case that UCLA is the better team. And so if that room is split, that's where having some of those metrics in the toolbox helps you differentiate where the pain points are in one team's resume versus another.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good information. Cause I was in it for 23 straight years, and I never looked at it from your perspective, even though every day you'd come in there and Chief and I would get mad at you. And all we know is that I got analytics. I got a test, the eye test. You used to hear that all the time, D.
Man, that's funny. That's funny. So KP, I'm gonna jump in too, because it sounds like you're a problem solver, right? That's really what you do. That's one of the gifts that you bring to the table. And so my question for you, and I really want you to think about this as you start looking at, who do you think is gonna make a run, or who do you think is gonna have an opportunity to make it to the Final Four? Is one of my big thoughts, because everybody wants to know who's gonna have an opportunity to win the whole thing, and that's something that I wanted to ask you.
Yeah. So the thing that happens, so we're gonna spend the next 5-6 days talking all about brackets and whether you're a 6 seed or a 7 seed and where are you going, and this single win, did it move you up or down a seed line? After the bracket's drawn, the bracket's really just a starting point. And so you're playing that first game, but as you well know, like Michigan State's made some Final Fours where you've had to kind of plow through higher seeds. Michigan State also made some Final Fours where you've gotten help along the way.
Exactly.
And so let's just say that Michigan State's a 6 or a 7 seed, for instance. Well, if you're a 6 seed and it just so happens that the 14 beats the 3 in the other game in your pod, now all of a sudden that is a very different dynamic. There was an instance, we were in Worcester back in 2005, a long time ago, and Vermont beat Syracuse. Vermont was a 13 and beat a 4 seed Syracuse.
Right.
We beat Old Dominion on Friday night, and as you recall, we were not very good against zone defenses that year. Like we just struggled with them, and Syracuse obviously plays all zone. Well, Vermont beat Syracuse. That is a very different matchup than having to go up against that Syracuse zone. So the bracket's kind of viewed as that starting points. Paths change along the way. Matchups come into play along the way stylistically. Like for Purdue, for instance, with Zach Edey, let's speculate that Purdue's a 1 seed right now. The 16 seed's unlikely to have any sort of bigs that are going to be able to stop him at all.
Right.
But that 8-9 winner, is that an 8-9 winner that plays more in the half court and has a 7-footer? Or is it an 8-9 that plays more small ball and doesn't have anybody to throw at Zach Edey? So like that's where, from a matchup standpoint, you start to worry about the names of the teams and the styles of play of the teams, as opposed to the number next to their name.
Wow.
Yeah, you're right. Well, I've always said this, and KP, you probably heard me say this in the tournament. Someone else's good fortune, as Vermont, Syracuse, good fortune that they won the game, became our great fortune. And a lot of times, I don't think everybody, the public or fans, really understand that dynamic of the tournament. You get the right draw, you can roll right through to the Final Four. On the other hand,
what that draw looks like on the when you first see the bracket and how it actually plays out are sometimes two very different things too.
Absolutely. Well, this year I've never seen anything like it with the parity in college basketball. Do you think, in your mind, that because of the parity, seeding will play a bigger part in this year's run to get to the Final Four?
I'll give you a bold prediction. The number of upsets, perceived upsets this year is going to be about the same that it is every year. It's usually about it's about the same number. You're going to have a 6 beat a 3. Somewhere there's going to be 2 12s that beat a 5, and a lot of the reason why the 12-5 upset is so prevalent is because what you typically have on the 12 line is it's the best teams that won their conference tournament that wouldn't have otherwise gotten in. So it's a team like Drake who's won 27, 28 games, whatever it is, that may not have the resume to get in at large, even though it's probably closer than people think. They've already won the Missouri Valley, but they're going to end up on the 12-ish line. And that is a team of older players that is familiar with winning games, that has just won a conference championship. I mean, remember that 68 teams fill the field. 32 of them are teams that won their conference tournament the week prior.
Right.
So they're already familiar with pretty significant success. And then your 36 at-large teams are your 27 win teams and your 23-8 teams that have 7 or 8 quad 1 wins, whatever it is. Everybody that's in the tournament has done something really positive. And that's why only 20% of Division I's in the NCAA tournament and 80% is left at home. Yeah,
that's true. That's true. It's not, unfortunately, we don't have an open tournament like that. And, but I think that's a good thing too. I don't like this, we have some people out there to say that it should be just an open tournament like it is in high school. I don't like that. I think it's a prestigious thing, and I think that the elite teams in the country deserve to play in it because it makes it that much more special.
The other thing that it does, Mike, is it values the regular season in a way that there's meaningful matchups. Like this is where and some folks get a bit paranoid about, well, we won all these games. Why don't we get in? Well, there is a little bit of socialized scheduling that goes on here where you're rewarding teams for the quality of wins, because what you're essentially doing is you're incentivizing good scheduling for the overall greater good of the game. So that over the last 4 months, now that doesn't mean that you're playing 31 games against top 50 teams, but there's interest that comes along. You're matching good teams up along the way in order to keep the game healthy for the first 4 months, which only serves as a springboard as we get into March.
You mentioned certain criteria. Could you explain to the audience about the quad 1 wins, quad 2 wins, and what versus what, and how a lot of people, particularly basketball fans, and this stuff is really important to them. They don't understand those type of things, strength of schedule. Could you kind of, put it where the goats can get it a little bit, KP, and
so
explain it in layman's terms what those different criteria are?
So essentially the net, which is the NCAA evaluation tool, is the primary sorting tool. And what that number is intended to do is it's intended to measure how good your team is. The correlation between what the committee is doing and the net is actually the lowest of the 6 metrics. And that's not to say that the net is bad, far from it. What the committee is saying is that you need to play net quality teams in order to build a resume to improve your standing relative to postseason selection and seeding. So what's done there is set up as kind of as a foundation in order to determine the quality of a given win. Quadrant 1 is wins against the top 30 at home, top 50 at a neutral site, and top 75 on the road. Now, to be clear, the difference between a win at home against 29 and 30 that are both quad 1 wins isn't any different than the difference between a win against 30 and 31, even though 30 is quad 1 and 31 is quad 2. There is a sensibility here that a win against 31 is not the same as a win against 74 just because it's sitting in the same quadrant. So it's really just a mechanism by which to have an artificial cutoff line in order to gain some perspective, rather than they're 1-1 against number 31, they're 0-0 against number 32. It's trying to simplify,
That's right.
codify the process in a bit of a way. So so that's where the quadrants are kind of set up, where a neutral site win against number 50, which is approximately the cut line for an at-large team. Mathematically, we went through, we worked with the NCAA, we worked with several others. There was 6 or 7 of us that were kind of part of this process, where mathematically a win against 50 on a neutral site is about the same as a win against number 30 at home, is about the same as a win against number 75 on the road. Doesn't mean it's perfect and the numbers are intentionally round. But in general, we've got enough data over time to be able to tell you that the difference between playing a team at home and versus a neutral site is worth about 3.5 points, and a neutral site to on the road is worth another 3.5 points. So
Right.
the difference between, let's say that I'm supposed to win by 5 when I'm at home. If I play that same team on the road, I'm supposed to lose by 2, just based on the location of the game, based on years of data, based on tens of thousands of results that we've been able to quantify.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, while we're on that subject, could you address, you know, and explain to our audience again, just how it works with the, you know, the last 5 out and the last 5 in?
Yeah.
4. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. 4. I'm sorry.
And the number 4 being part of that is really just kind of been a convenience in terms of just that there's 4 teams per seed line typically. Also, the last 4 teams in from an at-large standpoint are the 4 teams that participate in the first 4 in Dayton. The other 4 teams that participate in Dayton are on the 16 line. So it's the last 4 AQs, automatic qualifiers, and the last 4 at-larges that end up there. So so those last 4 in, first 4 out, which the first 4 out end up being the 4 1 seeds in the NIT. It's one where you are really splitting hairs. You've got teams that really start to look alike. And so what your differentiators become is how many quadrant 1 wins did you achieve over time? Is that number 2 or 3, or is that number 8 or 9? Additionally, when you start to get into opportunities, Belmont, when they made the tournament in 2019, they were 2-1 in quad 1. They only had 3 opportunities, but in those first 2 quadrants, they were, I think it was like 3-3, 4-3. So that 4-3 is going to look a lot different than a team that might be 2-12 or 3-12, where hey, we might have the same number of quadrant 1 and 2 wins, but there does come a point where you're looking at it from a win percentage standpoint, and a team like Belmont can get in because they had a road win at UCLA and they won 2 games against a Lipscomb team that happened to be really, really good, won 28 games that year. So they were able to build something without as many opportunities. So some of this is scaled to opportunities. Some of this is encouraging teams to create opportunities, but every team around that cut line is going to have something good and also going to have something that is pretty flawed. Namely, it's going to be teams that have 12, 13, 14 losses. And at what point do you take on too much water to be able to overcome your flaws?
Right. Well, KP, you know, I've also often wondered, you know, like when you have a when you have a team, and let's say in December you beat Indiana and they were number 1 in the country.
Yeah.
Then during the course of the season, they just didn't play well. And maybe they went on an 8 to 9 game losing streak, and now they're not in the top 25 anymore. Does their win-loss record have an effect on you?
So coaches aren't going to like this, but I would tell you that if, like, let's say you play Indiana, they're number 1 in December, and let's say by the end of the season they're 25. You want credit. You need to get credit for Indiana as the 25th ranked team. And let me tell you why.
Mm.
Because let's say that let's say Indiana's the 25th ranked team in December and you beat them. And by
Right.
the end of the season, they win every game after you play them, and they're number one in the country.
Right.
You want credit for them being number one there, right?
Yeah, I see where you're going.
So,
Right.
so both sides have
Right.
to work, and especially early in the season, what you most typically see is not that teams have changed, but preseason predictions were wrong.
Mm.
Mm.
And so to benefit or be harmed by a preseason prediction, it adds a margin of error to the process that frankly is unnecessary. So you want to be able to quantify how good an opponent is based on what happens before you play them, while you play them, and after you play them.
Right.
And you look at that collective data, and in the end, it's going to be more accurate than trying to quantify something else. The other part of that, though, that comes into play is injuries. And there's some outlier results that have come up because teams are missing players, but rare is the case that a team goes through an entire season where all 5 starters start every game and nobody misses a game. Like that,
Right.
that's just incredibly uncommon. And
Right.
so you may play a game without 2 starters and lose the game and be like, okay, like something happened, and there's some mulligans that come up. But where you've got to thread the needle a little bit is when you play an opposing team and they're a really good team, but they're down 2 starters and you're advantaged by that. You still want credit for them at full strength, right?
Right.
So that's where utilizing a committee to help be able to provide some context comes into play. And I'll tell you, injuries matter. Player availability matters.
Mm.
But the idea that a single result where an injury comes into play and creates an outlier result, the idea that that's going to affect you really all that much is very low, because over the course of 32, 33, 34 games, each game counts about 3% of your resume. Like even now going into the conference tournaments, you've got 90 to 95% of the team's resume that's already spoken for. And to put it in a different context, think of watching polling on election night, and think of when in that little bottom right-hand corner, they say that 93% of precincts are reporting. Well, usually by then the race is called.
Right.
Right.
So you put it in perspective in terms of building a resume for the NCAA tournament. At this point of the season, a lot of races are called. Maybe you're a 7 versus a 6. Maybe you're kind of in those last couple in, first couple out, and you got a chance that if you can do something more than just win a game, you maybe go into the Big Ten tournament and win 2 games, and you're a first 4 out right now. Maybe that pushes you across the finish line. That's a thing. But the idea that if you think you're a 7 or 8 right now, and then, oh, well, if we win the conference tournament, we'll get up to a 3 or a 4. No, you won't.
Yeah.
And nor should you either, because everything's got to count. And the idea that this week is going to count more than last week or the week prior, there's some real unintended consequences that can come from that.
Absolutely. Well, KP, going back, you'll remember this. You know, when the year we won the national championship in 2000, going into that final week, there was we were most likely to be a number 2 seed in the Midwest because Cincinnati had Kenyon Martin.
Yep.
And remember, Kenyon broke his leg right before the start of the tournament, and then that moved us into a number 1 slot.
Yep.
You know, it's you know, it's an unfortunate thing, but it's also kind of fair.
Yeah, and it's really tricky. Like even in that Cincinnati circumstance with Kenyon's injury, like Cincinnati still did a lot to earn a high seed over the course of the season. So you don't want to penalize a team for what at that time was an unknown. Like clearly they're not going to be as good without Kenyon Martin as with him.
Right.
Well, you know this, KP, that they were a number 2 but you have to give the selection committee some credit, because if you remember, they got beaten the second round without Kenyon. So they're banking on they're not as good a team as you said without Kenyon. And they probably would have never lost that game. And I'm glad that I didn't want to see him get hurt, but you know, them being out of there, because that was going to be the big game, us against them. And I was really scared for us, because it'd have been like us playing us. And it'd have been a bloodbath.
Yeah, and who knows what would have happened? I mean, even that Final Four that year, Michigan State's a 1, but the other 3 teams in the Final Four were a 5, an 8, and an 8, and one of them was a Wisconsin team that we had already beaten 3 times that season.
Right.
That kind of to tie it back around speaks to matchups and how brackets break and how things evolve over the course of the tournament. If we're trying to decide who the best team in college basketball is, the NCAA tournament is a horrible way to do that. But if we're trying to have 3 weeks of major fun, and create essentially, we're creating 67 game 7s along the way. So it's not about crowning the best team. It's about crowning the team that's the best at that moment. And things can go wrong. I mean, even let me add, I don't think either one of us want to bring up bad memories in terms of the Middle Tennessee game in 2016.
Oh man.
But you know, like that wasn't about us playing poorly. That was that Middle Tennessee started off the game 15-2. On the first 6 offensive possessions, they score 15 points, hit a couple threes, and one. We commit a charge, like just everything that could have gone right for them in a 3-minute span did. And so now you're 5 minutes into an NCAA tournament game, and you have to be 14 points better in a 35-minute game to win by 1. There's no safety net there in terms of a best of 7 series or some of these other things that may come up. Like it is go time to rally, and it happens like that. So the NCAA tournament is fantastic viewing. It is entertaining. It is pressure cooked. It is everything that we love about filling out our brackets. But the idea that the best team always wins, it's not a thing.
Right. Well, then KP, I want to add to that, because you know, during the month of March, people don't want to go to work. They don't want to do anything.
There's a lot of people that get sick on that Thursday. That come down with a cold.
Absolutely.
They sure do. You know, and also, you know, when I was a high school coach and high school teacher, there was a thing called TV1, and it was a national. The government put TV monitors in every classroom around the country, and boy, when the tournament would start that afternoon, every teacher in the school would make up an excuse why they needed to have that monitor on.
Absolutely.
It's an exciting time.
Yeah.
Well, KP, I know you're busy. We're not going to try to take up all your time, but you got to do this before last question, before you get off the air. Who are your picks for the Final Four?
Yeah. So
and which one of those teams do you think have the best chance of winning? Because it's all a chance.
Yeah. Right? So I'll kind of look at it from a 1 seed perspective. I mentioned 5 teams at the top and ultimately I think that it's you've got a Kansas team that's got 15 quad 1 wins, which is just an insane number of quad 1 wins. I mean, just from a perspective standpoint, Kansas has 15. The next most quadrant 1 wins is 11. Like that, it's an unheard of gap. So Kansas will likely be on the 1 line. Alabama will likely be on the 1 line. Houston's an interesting case because they on the predictive side have been number 1 across the predictive metrics for much of the season. The resume is a little bit short on that, but some of that just has to do with the opportunities that they've had along the way. but they've got a road win against Virginia. They've still been dominant
Right.
at 9-2. Then you get into Purdue. Purdue may have some losses late on the schedule, but you know that going on the road in the Big Ten and kind of how the sequencing of those games falls, oftentimes has something to do with that. And Purdue still 6-4 on the road in the conference, and won one of the top 2 conferences by 3 games. That's a pretty significant gap there as well. And then UCLA, who's been really good out in the Pac-12, is another team that's in competition for that 1 seed line. They've got an injury from last weekend that'll be worth monitoring here in the next week or so, as to kind of how that plays out for them as well.
Well, you didn't tell me who you thought would be your eventual winner.
That was a pro move at dodging the question. If you saw that,
I know,
because I think that you and I are supposed to take Michigan State to win it all. I think that's
no question.
That's the way. But in terms of favorites, in terms of teams to keep an eye on, those couple teams are kind of where I would focus on. But again, as much as I just gave you kind of the positives, like UCLA is dealing with an injury, and so things will change, and that's why, even as you look at different bracket pools and whatnot, there's a good 8 to 12 teams that I could sit here and make a sensible case as to why they could be not just in the Final Four, but also a national champion.
Wow. But and again, I'm going to let you off, but I don't want to fail to mention this. I just have a feeling, KP, from a personal perspective, that there may be a mid-major or mid-major plus team that makes the Final Four because of that 6 year of eligibility. You have some teams, their roster is dominated by 5 and 6 year players.
Yes.
And you know what that does.
It does. You're older. I mean, you got 24 competing against 18-year-olds. We've seen it in the Big Ten, where teams that have had players that have had that COVID 5th year, there's been some change in kind of the Big Ten pecking order.
Exactly.
Based on these players that would otherwise have been 1st and 2nd year pros, that are still playing college basketball. I think that it's actually improved the overall game. I think that it's improved the parity. I think that it's improved the depth of college basketball. So I think that it's actually been a good thing in some ways. I think that there's some other ways where maybe it's been a little bit more challenging for some freshmen and sophomores that otherwise would be playing, that are still sitting behind 5th and 6th year guys. But you're right that those teams are going to be probably in that 12 seed range. The challenge is that those 12 seeds, like a College of Charleston, a Drake, a VCU type, they're going to be on the same bracket as those 1 seeds.
Exactly.
So again, it goes all the way back to the draw and everything that comes up. If one of those 12s ends up where an 8 beats a 1 on their side of the bracket, then what you're saying certainly has an increased chance of happening.
Well, when you talk about matchups in the Middle Tennessee game, one of the big things was they played small. And if you remember, we had a gigantic team, and we just couldn't guard. Our bigs couldn't guard their bigs on the perimeter, and they started hitting shots, and one thing led to another, and it was just a poor matchup for us.
Sometimes that happens.
No question it does. Well, KP, it's been a great opportunity to sit here and chat with you about the upcoming tournament, and we really appreciate your time, man. We really do, and not only appreciate it, we value the time. And I'm gonna say this, and I've always thought this about you. You're associate AD. You started out as a manager for us at Michigan State. You've worked your way to the respect of everybody in the country. You're respected as a guy that, can administer sports maybe better than anybody around. And I'm just going to say this to everybody out there listening. One day you'll see Kevin Pauga as the commissioner of the Big Ten, the ACC, or the SEC. I don't know which one it'll be, but he's going to be there.
We'll see, but I appreciate that, G, and it's been a pleasure being with you.
All right. Thank you very much again.
Sounds
Take
good.
care, KP. Take care.
Thanks, guys.
All right, man.
All right, take care.
Yep.